Welcome to another episode of the Freedom-Filled Life and Historical Markers. Today we're in Chattooga County, Georgia, and we're going to learn about railroads and Indians and mills and all kinds of other things. So like, subscribe, and stay tuned, and let's learn about history. This marker is for Alpine, Georgia. It's part of the Chickamauga Campaign Heritage Trail. In late August 1863, the Federal Army of the Cumberland began moving toward Georgia. On the extreme right of the Federal lines, the XX Corps, approximately 15,000 soldiers commanded by Major General Alexander M. McCook, began advancing across Lookout Mountain with Alpine, Summerville, and Rome, Georgia as the objective line of march. At this site, on September 1, 1863, Confederate cavalry of the Army of Tennessee, commanded by Major General Joseph Wheeler, massed to plan and impede the Federal advance. Wheeler's forces blockaded the mountain roads and passes with felled trees. On September 1st, the Federal cavalry vanguard reached the east side of Lookout Mountain, and there were cavalry skirmishes at Tapp's Gap, present-day Cloudland, and at Neal's Gap in Chattooga County. September 3rd, 1863, Confederate and Federal cavalry skirmished near Alpine at Henderson's Gap. September 5th, 1863, the Federal cavalry 2nd and 4th Indiana Cavalry regiments passed through Alpine on reconnaissance towards Melville, present-day Lyerla, and skirmished near Alpine with 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Georgia and 5th Tennessee Confederate Cavalry regiments. September 8, 1863, Brigadier General George Crook, commander of the 2nd Division in Stanley's Federal Cavalry Corps, reported, "My command being in advance of General Stanley's expedition into Broomtown Valley, met the enemy at Alpine, where a skirmish ensued. The enemy retreated toward Rome. My loss was 3 killed and 11 wounded. Could not tell what damage was done to the enemy." September 9th, 1863, 9 a.m., Confederate generals Nathan Bedford Forrest, Joseph Wheeler, and John Wharton met at Alpine. Skirmish on Lookout Mountain. September 10th, 1863, Federal cavalry reconnaissance from Alpine toward Rome, Lafayette, and Summerville, Georgia, and skirmish at Summerville. September 11th, 1863, General McCook's headquarters established at the foot of Lookout Mountain near Alpine. Federal commander Major General D.S. Stanley orders aggressive reconnaissance toward Lafayette, attempting to establish contact with General George Thomas's 19th Corps, which General McCook believes is near Lafayette. Federal infantry forces arrive at Alpine. Federal Colonel Edward M. McCook leads the 1st Cavalry Division from Alpine to Melville, present-day Lyerla, on reconnaissance towards Rome. 6 companies of the cavalry were sent to Dirktown. September 12, 1863, skirmish at Alpine, most significant of Alpine skirmishes. Confederate records of General Joseph Wheeler estimated Confederate loss at 50, Federal loss at 200. September 13, 1863, 8 a.m., Federal Major General Alexander M. McCook begins retrograde march of the 20th Army Corps infantry divisions back up and across Lookout Mountain. McCook's headquarters is on top of Lookout Mountain by 5 p.m. September 15th, 1863, Federal cavalry forces leave Alpine to rejoin the 20th Army Corps on Lookout Mountain. September 19th and 20th, 1863, the Battle of Chickamauga. Structures remaining in Alpine from the Civil War period include several residences constructed around original log interiors, and the Alpine Community Presbyterian Church and the Samuel Knox Plantation House, which is 0.5 miles north of this site, retained their original antebellum appearance. Last Indian agent. Hugh Montgomery, born in South Carolina, January 8, 1769, is buried here. He was employed in 1786 to survey the line between Franklin County and the Cherokee Nation. He represented Jackson County in the Georgia legislature in 1807 to 11, and in the state senate from 1812 to 1818, and in 1823 to 1835. A religious man, he is said to have financed the first missionary to the Cherokees. He was appointed U.S. Indian agent to the Cherokees by President Monroe March 3, 1825, and served until the Cherokees were driven out of Georgia. For his services, he was granted 3,000 acres of land in Chattooga County. And this is the cemetery. Exactly where he is buried, I don't know. But this is definitely an old cemetery. Boyles Yard Turntable named Summerville Railroad Turntable, Summerville Historic Site. Restored to its current site in 2003, the historic Summerville Railroad Turntable was made during the era when railroads served as the primary means of long-distance commerce and travel. From the days of railroad yards and roundhouses, the turntable was used to rotate locomotives and place them in the desired direction while using a lesser amount of land than otherwise needed to maneuver such a turn. This massive 90-ton steel structure was built in 1916 in Ambridge, Pennsylvania by the American Bridge and Iron Company, which later became part of the U.S. Steel. Measuring 100 feet in length, the turntable was constructed of 2 I-beams and connected by supporting beams which were riveted together to form its fish belly design. For many years, this turntable served in the Boyles Yard in Birmingham as part of the Louisville and Nashville Railroad. There it was surrounded by the largest roundhouse in the L&N system, having 36 stalls. During the height of the railroad era, the turntable was used to direct the steam locomotives of such famous L&N passenger trains as the Pan American, the Azalea, and Florida Arrow, as well as the Silver Bullet fast freight train and numerous other regional and local freight and passenger trains. The turntable continued to operate at the Boyles Yard after L&N was merged into the CSX Railroad. It was retired from the Boyles Yard in the late 1900s. As a donation from the CSX Railroad, the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum acquired the historic turntable and saved it from being turned into scrap metal. The massive load was moved from Birmingham to Lafayette, Georgia by large truck and then placed on a railroad car and transported over the rails to J.R. Dick Dowdy Park in downtown Summerville. Appraised as a railroad artifact at $1.25 million, the turntable was used by Summerville as the matching funds for 2 grants from the Georgia Department of Transportation. The installation of this railroad antique restored one very few operational turntables in the United States. Extensive engineering and support were required for the foundation of the completed structure, which holds the turntable and includes a large circular concrete pit, drain system, peripheral track, and electric motors. Steel pilings were driven 80 feet into the earth to support the weight of this massive structure, as well as the weight of the diesel or steam locomotives it must turn, which weigh approximately 150 tons. Since its dedication and renaming in May 2003, the Summerville Railroad Turntable has provided growth in local civic pride and growth in tourism. It has been used to turn steam locomotives on excursions from the Tennessee Valley Railroad, diesel locomotives on local passenger excursions, and rail cars on excursions by the North American Railcar Association. Further information on the steam locomotive excursions from Chattanooga to Summerville can be located on the website tvrail.com, and then there's some other additional information in some other places. And then right here is the turntable. The Couey House, Summerville Historic Site. Built in the early 1840s by Andrew McSweeney Couey, this log house is one of the earliest pioneer homes in Chattooga County. As the land was cleared, the house was constructed of huge logs which were hoisted into place and carved into half-dovetail ends. As the house was erected, the house was restored to this site as it was considered to be a significant representation of the craftsmanship and lifestyle of the early pioneers in this area of North Georgia. Originally, the house was located nearly 7 miles from this site in Dirttown Valley near Tidings, Georgia. As the home of the family of Andrew and Farabee Couey, The house was once surrounded by a profitable 400-acre farm which produced corn, cotton, and livestock. As with many Southern homes, the war between the states brought much hardship as Union soldiers passed through the area and depleted supplies. In addition to the loss of material goods, the inhabitants of the Couey House suffered greatly during the war between the states with the death of their son Andrew Jackson Couey in Virginia on November 1st, 1861. Like most Chattooga County men, Couey fought with the Confederate Army. His death and all Chattooga County's loss of life and livelihood were particularly ironic, since this humble county, with very few slaveholders, had voted against secession from the Union, and the secession convention held in Milledgeville, Georgia, on January 19, 1861. The Couey's younger son, Eli Couey, also joined Company B, 9th Georgia Infantry, served throughout the war, and was present at the surrender of Appomattox, Virginia, on April 9, 1865. Also known as the Couey Owings Knowles House, this historic structure is the home of Andrew Couey until his death in 1882. Later, in 1904, it became the home of Couey's granddaughter, Flora Couey, who married William H. Owings. After the farm was subdivided and sold over the following decades, the house was last owned by Billy Knowles, prior to being acquired by the Georgia Department of Transportation. Due to the widening of the U.S. Highway 27, the original site of the Couey House was needed. The relocation to Dowdy Park in Summerville was begun in 1995, and though modern additions to the house had been added, only the original log structure was moved. Historic efforts of the Summerville Fire Department saved the house from complete loss in 2005 as the house was once again restored. The preacher porches were removed to allow the front porch to be open across the full width of the structure. This returned the facade to the appearance of the early 1900s. So here's the actual house. Let's walk on around to the front of it. Summerville, Georgia, Chickamauga Campaign Heritage Trail. In the late 1863, the Federal Army of the Cumberland began moving forward toward Georgia. On the extreme right of the Federal lines, the 20th Army Corps, commanded by Major General Alexander M. McCook, began advancing across Lookout Mountain with Alpine, Summerville, and Rome, Georgia as the objective line of march. Federal cavalry regiments, commanded by Major General David Stanley, reconnoitering far in front of the main body of the 20th Army Corps, arrived in Summerville from Alpine on September 6, 1863, and skirmished with Confederate cavalry near this site. On September 7th of 1863, the Federal cavalry returned to Summerville and skirmished again with Confederate cavalry. September 8, 1863, Confederate General Wheeler arrives in Summerville. So here were some of the special orders. The headquarters of the Cavalry Corps, number 70, Summerville, Georgia, September 8, 1863. Number 1, General Wharton will detail 300 of his best officers and men armed with long-range guns to join General Forrest on a reconnaissance of the enemy's position. Number 2, the detail will report to General Forrest at Alpine at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning and will, as far as possible, include those officers and men who, having already scouted the mountain, are familiar with that section of the country. Number 3, they will carry 2 days' rations and a feed of corn in their forage sacks and will be provided with 80 rounds of ammunition per man. Number 4, General Wharton will select a good colonel to command the detail. Number 5, the commanding officer at Alpine will be instructed to direct an officer with the company to follow this detail and establish a line of couriers from Alpine and stand not more than 4 miles apart, by order of Major General Joseph Wheeler, E.S. Burford, Major and Assistant Adjutant General. On September 8, 1863 at 8 a.m., Confederate General Nathan Forrest reports to General Wheeler that he is at Gower's Gorse Cap in Taylor's Ridge with a cavalry brigade and 6 pieces of artillery, and that he is expecting another brigade by 12 o'clock noon. September 10th, 1863, the skirmish in Summerville, federal state possession of the town. September 13th, 1863, skirmish near Summerville. September 15th, 1863, skirmish in Summersville. September 19th to 20th, 1863, the Battle of Chickamauga. Well, that was Chattooga County. I certainly hope you learned something. I hope you like, subscribe, and we'll learn more about history in future episodes of Historical Markers.